Well, hey, y'all, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. So glad to have you here with us today. You know what, Rich? Hang on a minute. There we go. All right. Hey, all, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. For a minute there, I didn't think we were live, which is something that drives me crazy when people do live streams. They're like, hold on a minute. I don't think this thing is live, but it is now. So thanks for being a part of the Common Good Podcast, friends. If this is a regular for you, you might know that we have regular conversations on Tuesdays about the politics of life in America. And on Wednesdays, we love talking to people who are active in the world, trying to create the kind of world that they want to be in. And I'm super excited to have Rich here. Rich Logis is the person behind a group called Leaving MAGA. And it's part of his own story, part of the story that he works with. So, Rich, thanks so much for being here.
Yes, my pleasure, Doug. Thank you. Happy to be here. I don't get a chance to speak with a lot of faith-based organizations, so it's a great honor for me to be with you today. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, hey, I think the first place I saw you, I was sitting inside the United Center at the DNC, and on the big screen popped up a series of stories and testimonies and of people who've been a part of politics in certain ways. And it was for the Democratic presidential nomination in last August. And I saw you on there, and I thought, I love groups like this, because we're always hunting around for other people who are also helping folks who find themselves trapped inside of a world that they don't want to be in. And I want to be really clear. Some people, they don't feel trapped in MAGA, or they don't feel trapped in Trump supporting or Republicanism. Some people are quite happy, right? But there's an awful lot of people who are like, if I had another option, I would take it. I just don't feel like I do. And we know those people. We meet them all the time. We know people in our family and friends that they kind of feel that way. And so it's a really complicated situation for people who are looking to make an identity change like this. Okay, give us a little background on your personal story, how you got into this. And then we're going to have a chance, folks, to talk with Rich about what his organization does. And if you don't already know them over at leavingmaga.org, you should head over there. But Rich is putting together material, helping people. And Rich, the way I like to think about it is especially people who feel deeply tied into what MAGA promises. Because I think there's a bit of a difference between the like standard Republican who's just like, look, I'm an R, I vote for Republicans, and so I just go with whoever the nominee is because I'm not going to vote for a Democrat. And then there's some people for whom they're like, I don't even see myself as political, and I am in with Trump and MAGA. And it's a different thing. Like when I talk to those folks, they're not talking politics. They're talking about a different identity in the way they think about it. And they'll always tell me, I'm not partisan, I'm not political, I wasn't in any of this stuff. I think both parties are a pox on the House of America. That's why I choose MAGA. Like they see MAGA as the third alternative. And some other people are like, look, been Republican my whole life, or it came with my faith or something like that. So can you talk a little bit about your view of that and your own experience with it?
Sure. Thank you. Let me get my bad joke out of the way. If I'd lived many years ago, I'd probably be an excommunicated Catholic. But remain a Catholic today with our family. So let me just get that really awful joke. It'll be my only awful joke today.
I bet.
I relate to the latter about those who felt like both parties have failed. They're the same. That was my entree into MAGA back in 2015 and 16. I was someone who voted for third parties many times. I was someone who did believe that the two parties were the same. And I thought that the entire political order and the system itself needed to be obliterated and built anew. And so that was why I gravitated toward the MAGA movement in the community. And I really stress and emphasize community. Because if we look at how MAGA is so commonly spoken about amongst those who oppose the president, they speak about it in terms of cult, for example. And I think that's really unhelpful language, because what that does is it tries to demean that people find value and meaning in being a part of the MAGA community. And I look at it as far as in terms of, if we look at faith-based communities, I home in on the community part of faith-based communities, where they're like-minded individuals. They have shared dreams, shared goals, they have shared faith. Now, I'm not making a direct comparison, because so much about MAGA is based in and buttressed by falsehoods and lies, and I had to realize that very painfully. It was liberating for me, but over the course of an entire year, it did take me that much time to walk away from that second family, that community. And oftentimes, Doug, as much as I'm embarrassed to admit it, my second family
Yeah.
oftentimes took precedence over my own blood family. And the other reason it was so hard to walk away, to paraphrase Hemingway, my epiphany happened gradually and then suddenly all at once, was that my belief system, I realized, was wrong, and that those I thought were existential threats and enemies, whether they were Democrats or liberals or progressives or anti-Trump Republicans, I needed to detox from that and reverse that
Wow.
belief system. And once I realized that I had been wrong and had accumulated years and years and years of false beliefs, it was on August 30th, 2022. It's what I call my Leaving MAGA anniversary, where I
Wow.
wrote,
You can name the day, huh?
the exact day, August
Wow.
30th, 22. I published a mea culpa, and I said in that mea culpa that I was wrong. I renounced my support for MAGA, and that I wanted to acknowledge my errors and apologize to anyone I may have hurt via my actions and rhetoric. And God's honest truth, no pun intended, Doug, I didn't think that anybody would care.
That's right. So what led to that, Rich? What happened? How do you have a date so specific? I've heard you talk about how COVID was handled and feeling like, okay, well, we kind of do need something a little more than just anti-government sentiment. But what was it about that day that caused you to come to that moment of epiphany?
Sure. In that DNC video that you mentioned, which people can watch that vignette at our site, leavingmaga.org, we've got a media section. All of our content is open source, not paywalled. I did make mention of the president's mismanagement of COVID.
Hmm.
And yes, that was a reason. The election wise, January 6th, these were all factors, but they weren't enough for me to leave. The first accelerant was my governor, Ron DeSantis. I've been in Florida for many years. In the summer of 21, late summer, early fall, he started platforming anti vaxxers at his pressers. And that really confused me, because that was not at all something I expected
Mm,
from him, because I thought that, in fairness, he did a relatively good job in the first year and a half.
okay.
Certainly compared to the president, he looked like a Nobel laureate. And so it so it
Okay.
it, it looked I was very, very stunned and shocked about why he was giving official platforms to those who were talking about the vaccine as harmful, and that it was actually deadlier than the virus. So when that happened,
Hmm.
it was like I ran face first into a brick wall, and I started to then diversify my news and information sources.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
as I diversified, it's when it started me on the pathway of realizing, no, those with whom I disagree they're not my
Hmm.
enemies.
Wow.
They're not people who are trying to take my guns or replace me as a white person or try to indoctrinate my kids in public schools. So that was all happening late summer 21, early fall. And I went through the next many, many months vacillating between being in, being out, starting to question my belief system. But then I would, for example, look at a photo of an event at Mar-a-Lago, and I would think, no, I'm still in the right place. That just we're going through a rough
Yeah.
patch right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
Having
Yeah.
these ping-ponging of emotions.
Yep.
And there was another accelerant for me that happened in May. It was the exact date, May 24th, 2022. That was the Uvalde school shooting that day. And I
Wow.
was in my car, white knuckled, driving on the steering wheel. I've got my hand also on my AR-15 that was in my passenger seat. And I was going to do something that I never thought that I would ever do, which was
Wow.
to go and sell it.
Wow.
And
Wow.
what saddens me so much about that day, amongst other reasons, is that I knew exactly what the response was going to be from the Republican Party. And I knew it was going to
Yeah.
be the same, right? The same about
Yeah.
hardening doors and school security. And it was after that event, shortly thereafter, that I quietly left. I only told a few people, so it
Oh.
was a quiet quitting.
Hmm.
But that to me, it started to dawn on me was not enough. And I had this really gnawing feeling that I was so unapologetically public in my support for MAGA that I needed to be public in my renunciation of it. And that's what led me to publish that apology letter on August 30th to 22.
I see. Well, I was okay. I was going to ask you, how does somebody like you quietly quit MAGA when you ran a podcast where you were extolling and helping people find their way into the MAGA movement and
Mhm.
into the community that is formed around MAGA? And it is, in my estimation, clear that it is a community. And you were public in other spaces and ways. I'm sure you were public with family and friends. Like, how does a person start to quietly quit that kind of thing? And I ask this for a couple of reasons. One, so people will recognize when other members of their family or friend group are doing it. And also maybe they're thinking about themselves like, I don't know how to quietly quit. Because here's what I'm
Mhm.
sure of, Rich, and I'd love your input on this at some point after you get to tell me the rest of that story. Most of us would rather be wrong and in a community than be right and be alone. Because we will determine that maintaining the community is more important and gives us more than being right about something that may or may not matter. So you just don't want to give it all up just to go be right. And I actually think that's a good thing. I wish more of us were willing to set
Sure.
aside the things we think, and I'm a pastor who thinks religion kind of matters, but it doesn't mean you have to give up that which is important. So this reality that even when people are like, okay, I don't go with all of it, or I don't even know that they're all right, or I kind of don't even care like I did before, but I don't want to give up the community. How does someone quietly quit when they've been public the way that you have?
Yeah, I give thanks on a daily basis that I was able to leave even though I didn't have a place to go.
Mm.
And when I do say that I didn't think that anyone would care about my own story, and I realized that I was mistaken about that, the moment that I published that apology, I had comments from people all across the country. Rich, can you talk to my mother, my brother, my father, my kids, my best man, my maid of honor? I was completely naive and oblivious to how much this movement had torn so many relationships asunder. And having been in a crossroads, what I realized is that people wanted to hear this story, and I went about telling it, and that helped me come out of
Mm.
that. It was a kind of transition where telling that story and realizing that people wanted to hear it, I needed to make a decision on what I wanted to do with my story. Did I want to just keep telling it, or did I feel like there was a
Mm.
certain point where I've told it enough and I've tried to make amends. Hopefully I did. But again, just like when I quietly quit and knew something with that, there was something in the conscience telling me that it wasn't enough. I had to I had to come to a conclusion of, do I keep doing this or do I retire? And that's
Mm.
when the idea for Leaving MAGA as an organization came to me. And I decided, no, I'm going to continue this because I feel it's incumbent upon myself to do it.
Yeah.
And I completely unlikely,
Yeah.
unintended, accidentally said, okay, I'm going to create a new
Okay.
community where people can go
Yeah.
after they leave. Because even to your point, even when someone knows deep down that they should leave a community, if they don't have a
Hmm.
place to go, they're less
That's
likely
it.
to do it.
Yeah. We're in our world, we say, look, there's always three conditions in place for someone to make a significant change in their life. And this is true in politics. It's true in religion. Those of us who help people to acquire a religion that they didn't grow up with or something. It's true for people who want to start playing pickleball. I don't know, or like stop drinking or change their eating habits. There's always these three elements that are somewhere in place. Someone takes in some kind of information. Maybe it's information that's exciting and new, like, oh, there's a new game I can play and it's not as hard as tennis and it's pickleball. Or someone says, hey, I think my drinking is kind of interfering with some things in my life. Or there's some bit of realization, knowledge, facts, and usually a bunch of them. And when someone looks back on their life, they'll be like, oh, there was a long list. But at the time, there was one or two that popped out. So that's usually there, often at the beginning, but it's there. And then there needs to be an invitation at some point, like someone. When you hear people tell their stories about these transitions, they'll usually say, and then someone said, or I heard something, or there was some call, like someone else had been in front of me and said, I'm new to pickleball. Or you sit in an AA group, or you go to a church and you're like, hey, I'm new around here too. I don't know how all this stuff works. Like someone invites you to keep going on that path that that information sets you on. But then this third component is the one that you've articulated so well, which is then there has to be an us to join, because if not, then people just sort of slow down or stop thinking about it. If they don't have a new us to be a part of, human beings, man, we just, I mean, for some people, that us can be two people. For some, it can be a global community they never meet in person. For some, it's online, right? Whatever. It's a historic community that people live in, whatever. But you need something. And then I would even suggest the way that people get healthy, most healthy, is then they end up with a new worldview that makes sense out of their past and allows them to bring their past to bring some healing to the world that they want to live in. Like that's where it really gets sort of key. But that community piece is really hard because I'll tell you what, the people I know who admit that they were wrong about MAGA, their friends and often family or the Democratic Party or some woke group they're in, like Vote Common Good or something, often doesn't treat them very well. They'll say stuff like, what took you so long? Or how could you have ever believed that? Or I'm not even sure I ever actually trust you. Like, um, and I mean, this is documented not only in personal stories, it's actually people that know their Bible well know, like, oh, this is like the Apostle Paul's story, right? Starts as Saul, is persecuting Christians, then becomes one, then has to go hide away, and then the Christians don't recognize him and want him to leave and think he's doing it all wrong. Like just how human beings have been across cultures in so many ways, and helping someone. So what happens to a lot of us, Rich? And I love your thoughts here. We think the information distribution is the essence of what we can do. Like tell people things, show them the facts. Because that little list I gave, information, invitation, and community participation, sometimes it works in reverse. Like people are like, I don't know, I started hanging around these people and I'm kind of in with them. And then they said, hey, there's more. And would you like to look at this? Like sometimes it goes the other way. And I would even suggest maybe most of the time it goes the other way. Do you have any thoughts about any of that sort of taxonomy of change and all that, or how it
Sure.
influences you or your own work?
Sure. I will say that leading with facts and policy usually doesn't accomplish anything and oftentimes will just further alienate what already might be an estranged relationship. And conversely, the way that so many MAGA voters are spoken of as being racist and Nazis and misogynists, there are probably billions of words penned and spoken in that vein. And if they actually worked, nobody would be in MAGA because there's been so much of it said that people say, "Oh, I guess I'm a homophobe, so I'm going to just leave right now." So that clearly hasn't worked either. And with the accidental creation and unlikely founding of Leaving MAGA, to slightly paraphrase the book of Isaiah, we want to bring good news to the afflicted, and it is an unnatural act for our Homo sapiens species to apologize and acknowledge error.
Mm, mm,
And there is a societal stigma
yeah.
about doing it for exactly the reason you said, which is, okay, someone might say, I want to change my mind. I want to, and even publicly say that. But they're also understandably afraid of the repercussions of doing that, which would be more shame and casting aspersions on one's intelligence and impugning one's integrity. And so, if someone wants to change their mind and they're afraid of that, I can't really fault that person for not wanting to admit it to many, if any. And with our organization, we have several who have taken on leadership roles, including we have one lady, Stefania, we have another one named Anthony. These are both evangelical Americans who had crises of faith.
Hmm.
And by the good graces, they didn't have anywhere to go originally, but then discovered us. And
Mm,
so they said, okay, I want to tell my story through this organization and I want to help show others that it is okay to change our mind. And as part of this work that we do, reconciliation is really, really important because we want friends and
Hmm.
family to welcome back those closest to them without judgment, without ostracization. And if people feel like they can have that space and that freedom to acknowledge a wrong, we want friends and family in particular to say, okay, we can embrace them back because people make mistakes and we should allow people to make amends
Hmm.
when they want to.
Yeah, look, I hear you. And can I push on a couple of those things for a minute from your own
Sure.
story, how you've managed this? There are some things in the MAGA movement which really does demonize people. Like it is designed, and to the both sides this that watch all the time, welcome. We'd love to have you. Yes, I
Right.
know that the Democratic Party and lefties and wokers and all this, we do it too. Yes. Okay. But we're talking about people who are leaving MAGA now. I'd love to have a podcast about people that left leftism and joined MAGA. That's true too. I know people because it's much closer than people might think, right? The circle, like the continuum might not be a straight line. It might be a circle, and you end up far enough on the continuum and turn around and you're standing right next to the people that are very similar to you. It's an interesting conversation. But there are some things inside of the MAGA world, and there are some things about Donald Trump in particular, which are attractive to many people that I know. A good friend of mine says it this way. He said, "You know why I like Donald Trump? Because he hates Democrats more than I do. He stands up to them. We need a bully. We need him to punch you all in the metaphorical face, or as Trump says it, literally punch him in the face. Like, I need someone because you people are going to destroy America. You people want to, okay. And there's a whole thing, right? And there's conversation about immigrants, and there's conversations about all kinds of people and attacking trans people. Like, there's a whole thing that goes on in the MAGA world that funds a lot of people's pursuits. Why the Oath Keepers are in it. It's why the Proud Boys. And look, I've sat in bars with having conversations with Proud Boys, debating it out. It's on our channels and all this stuff. Like I'm willing to engage, and I see the humanity in all people. But there's also something that's just true in all transition that requires a little confession, of the information. So how do you help people who see this stuff going on? And some of us see it in our own family members. And we're like, are you kidding me right now? Like, do you really think that? And all of a sudden it comes up, no, actually, yeah, I do. So it's not good to say someone's homophobic or someone's against trans or someone's racist or someone's against immigrants. And then it gets a little bit hard sometimes for some people to be like, but you're surrounding yourself and you're putting up posts about these things and you're saying it and you're quiet on times when you shouldn't. Where does it fit for a person going through a transition, a conversion, a shift out, whatever, to kind of say, hey, there was some stuff I was into there that was really opposite of how I want to be, and I've come to realize that now. And what about the people who feel like they're pointing that out to family and friends? How do they navigate it? Do you see what I'm getting at? Because I think
Sure.
a lot of people feel really lost in how they truth tell. And look, I'm all about calling in rather than calling out. Like, if you're going to call someone out, you better call them into something else, right? There's no point in saying get out of there unless you're willing to say come on in here, right? Yeah. You don't shout out your window to get away. You shout out your door to come on in. Super important. But how does someone do that with honesty and integrity if they think these other issues are actually at play?
Sure. I'll mention about there's a written and video version that I put together of how friends and family can try to rejuvenate those pre-MAGA relationships that they have with friends and family. And something that is part of the blueprint is how to help those in MAGA lower their defenses, because any conversation that is even could be construed even remotely as confrontational, the defenses go up, and once the bulwarks and the stanchions are up, it's really hard to tear them down and overcome them. And I'll give you a specific example of that dehumanization that I engaged in, that I said in my podcast, that I put in my writings. It was a common conversation where we would say that anyone who was a Christian or a Jew who was not in the MAGA movement, they were not a real Christian, they were not a real Jew. And that was commonplace. And that is how we dehumanized others of faith. We would say we're the real Americans, everybody else is the fake Americans. If I'd met you, Doug, I'll give you a prorated apology, because if I'd met you, I'd have said, here's Doug, a white Christian liberal, and he's not a real Christian. So if you think about anti-Christian, if you think about anti-Jewry, a lot of what I said in MAGA and what others around me, we were embodying that.
Hmm.
And as we embodied that, I had to come to this place where I needed to emancipate myself from that way of thinking, because what it did is I dehumanized others, and in the process
Yeah.
I lowered my own humanity. I self-demonized, and when we're doing that, that's how we're going to see the world, through that lens. We're going to see it as such that everybody is a threat, and it created MAGA for me created these perpetual states of desperation and panic and despair and paranoia and very all or none nihilism, to
Wow.
use a fancy word from my theology courses when I was a
Oh, wow.
theology minor in
Yeah.
college.
Okay.
So yeah, English major, theology minor, and had
Great
amazing
combo.
amazing professors. And one of them was a believer in Calvinism, and while I don't quite believe in predestiny, I do sometimes wonder if I think I think the man above, excuse me, I think that he'll open doors for us,
Hmm.
but ultimately we got to walk through them, because we operate on our own volition and we have free will.
Mm-hmm.
And so to come away from a community and to have a new place to go, that's why we developed and established what we did, and why there are some within our organization who are taking on these leadership roles.
Yeah. So, do you have a person there at the door? I heard a little
No, no,
knock,
no,
knock.
no. Yes, no, no. Sorry about that.
No, no. Around here, it's not a care in the world. We do this while we're living our normal lives, like everybody who
Live
watches
stream.
and
That's what I was
listens.
saying. Here's to live streaming. This is just water, everyone.
It's called live. Yeah, it's called live for a reason, because we're living our lives while we talk about these things. Um, how much was Donald Trump personally, the personhood of Donald Trump, the guy, an attraction for you to get in and stay in and support? And how much was Donald Trump part of you thinking, I can't stay there anymore?
There's a little bit of an all of the above answer that I'll offer on that. One of the determinations I had made in 2015 and 16 was that I thought that he was the best person for the job, because he seemed willing and able to take that flamethrower to the system. And I looked at him as someone who didn't really need the job,
Mm.
and thus that meant that he was going to do it for the right reasons, which was to make the country a better place for all Americans. And there were some valid issues that I still say to this day. At the time, I don't think they're applicable any longer, but at the time they were understandable, legitimate reasons to support him. Economic anxieties, uh, once vibrant communities that had been hollowed out. These were the post financial global crisis and meltdown. People were still feeling the effects of that. And I think that people informed their decision to some extent, many of them with those realities, including many who were not Republican and maybe were more independent leaning,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more
Mm-hmm.
independent blue leaning voters who decided to take a chance on Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for the devotion and loyalty is because he is the leader of the political community. Now,
Mm-hmm.
there were times that I did criticize him with other MAGA Americans privately. We criticized him after Charlottesville. We
Mm-hmm.
criticized him a lot during COVID, but we never did it publicly. And the
Mm.
reason the reason we never did it publicly is because if anyone in MAGA spoke out against the president in public, they were a MAGA apostate and heretic, and
Oh.
they and they were excommunicated and exiled out of the community. And I realized, Doug, that some people might hear that and think, okay, it is a cult that they wouldn't do that. I understand why someone would say that. I do. And for me, there were some cult-like aspects of being in MAGA. It was not a, it was, for me, it wasn't a day-to-day hobby. I lived my life every day, every hour, being a patriotic MAGA soldier in this existential war against my enemies. And it was crush your enemies first before they crush you.
Huh.
So this
Interesting.
was this way of thinking that I didn't just occasionally tap into. It was how I always thought. And if you think about what that does to a person, that when they come to a place where they start to have uncertainty, there's a personal reckoning that one goes through and thinks, I said all of this. Is there a way from, and in my case, wrote it and said it, is there a way for me to make this right? And that is a real struggle that people who might be thinking about leaving MAGA
Hmm.
are they are going to go through it. And I don't want to sugarcoat it, but with leaving MAGA, they at least now have a place to come to, and it
Hmm.
can make leaving not easy, but just a little bit easier than what it was that I went through.
Rich, you strike me as someone who really wants to pursue an integrated life. Like you seem like integrity and having your world match its exhortations, it matters to you. You know, you don't suffer fools lightly, and you don't want. I'm just sort of picking this up from your work and from your story, that you want there to be some integration and making things right. Is that do you think that's true of you? Is that an accurate?
Yes, and part of that approach that I take, to quote the book of Romans here, to be patient in affliction,
Yeah.
which is something that I've mentioned many times to friends and family, that I know it can belie our sense of urgency, but being patient with others who are struggling, who are questioning their identity and their being and their personhood.
Mm,
None of that is a simple task. It's really arduous to go through such a fundamental transformation
yeah.
of one's being. And we agree as a nation more than we disagree.
Yeah.
That's something that I also came to understand better going through the odyssey of leaving MAGA and then eventually making the determination that I was going to sever myself from the movement. And I think if anyone out there is watching this and they're thinking about their own friends and family,
Mm,
there's going to come a point for many who are in MAGA who are going to start to have doubts. We're already starting to see some buyer's remorse.
okay.
We're seeing reports about it. We're seeing people they didn't think that their choice would affect them adversely. And I know that it's very popular in our current commentary to do the F around, find out. I'm not going to say it, F blank around, find out. And Doug, look, I don't, as part of that integration, I don't have a problem with people feeling the consequences of their votes. That's how reality
Right.
is. That's what,
Right.
right? That's what Bootstrap's real world is.
Yeah.
And I feel like to deny reality to someone does a disservice to them and hurts more than helps. But okay, we can say F around, find out. But for those who are truly regretful and feel remorse, we can be better than the really cheapened commentary of, I don't care, you're going to get what you deserve. Some people are going to, yes, they are going to get what they deserve. So we can take one of two tracks. We can say, I'm going to wallow in that person's misery. Or if that person is saying, I'm second guessing my choice, well, doesn't it make better sense for us? And it's harder to do it, but doesn't it make better sense for us to say, okay, now's a chance for us to unite with this person.
Right. Right.
Now's a chance for us to actually strengthen the American community, because it's really hard to develop democracy as a community.
That's right.
Former President Obama did a very good job with this, but the fact that it's not really been done since, except unless you count MAGA. MAGA is truly a community where people have like-mindedness. They also have a shared enemy, which is a point that I wanted to mention about ideology. MAGA does not, in my view, have an ideology.
Hmm.
The closest to it is a conviction that liberalism and liberal
Yeah.
democracy are the source of all of our
That's
personal
it.
and national ills. Now, Doug, it's not like people in MAGA now, or even when I was in, that we woke up, we started our day by saying, you know what, today we're going to go attack liberalism and liberal
Hmm.
democracy.
Okay.
It's not that it's thought about that way, but that's who the shared enemy is. And
Yeah.
so that shared enemy is a tie that also binds the MAGA community, because it now points everybody in the same direction of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are failed. We need a MAGA party. And I will tell you, Doug, for those listening and watching, that when I was in MAGA, it was a fantasy of ours to kill the GOP and supplant it with the MAGA party, and that has
For
been
sure.
accomplished, and
That
that's
is,
been
yeah.
achieved.
Yeah. That mission is complete. Yeah. Look, I think that's so helpful. I think that latter description there is what I think is going. I think the reason Elon Musk and this whole, Elon's department of getting rid of the government makes sense to people is because a lot of people in the country and a lot of people in the MAGA movement believe that the liberal tree has produced a lot of bad fruit and we have to get rid of the tree. It's all bad fruit. So we're just going to dig it up and get rid of it. USAID, like just go down the list of things that are part of the liberal imagination for globalism. And I think a lot of this roots in anti globalist sentiment and being replaced with nationalist sentiment and so on. So it's kind of about that, and all the other stuff that happens is like that's just how it goes, man. That's just that's what happens. Yeah, we're tearing down the house, and that means we're gonna tear up the yard. Sorry, but that's how it goes. That's what I think the essence of this Trump 2.0 dealio is just like, oh, we're done screwing around now. Like we're not we have 48 months to accomplish this goal, and we are starting month one. So I think that's right. I also want to say a comment about like it's super interesting to hear you describe how people experience being encouraged to leave MAGA and what they go through. And I can't miss a good Jesus quote every now and again. And Jesus has this great analogy called a parable that he says, look, there's a bunch of field workers, and some of them work all day, and some of them work half the day. It's lovely that Jesus uses field workers, but field workers all day, field workers half the day. Some work 1 hour. And at the end of the day, they all get paid the same. They're all welcomed. And the parable, after he finishes in the parable, he says, and then all the other workers are like, no, I worked more of the time, and this merit-based system of he did the right thing, they didn't do the right thing, I should get more. And Jesus says, let me just describe to you the way humanity ought to be, the way the kingdom of God works. They're all going to get the same. Yeah. And that graciousness is what I think for a lot of people on the left, a lot of people in the middle, a lot of anti-Trumpers need to meditate on a bit. Like, are we willing to say, first of all, you can be an American and be MAGA. You're not an American. You can be an American and think a lot of things and do a lot of things, and you are an American. And if you change your mind, you're in just like everyone else, and you don't have to earn it. Like I don't but that's not how it is. I just want to be very blunt. I work in the political world. That is not how it. I mean, I'm looked at suspiciously for for the work. Try telling somebody you voted for Bush twice and you get moved out, and you're kept out over at the kids' table. So this is very common in the in the world, and we're going to have to overcome it because the purity demands on the left and the purity demands on the MAGA right, they're killing us, and we have to be able to do something about it.
Yeah, and I don't have any kind of ideological purity test at Leaving MAGA. There is only one non negotiable mandate we have, which is to truly leave, one does need to take responsibility for past actions and rhetoric.
Oh, interesting.
That,
How
yeah,
how
that
do you suggest how someone does that? Is that
I think it's just in really simple terms. I think it's just a positive affirmation of saying I was wrong, I was mistaken,
mm,
and now I want to offer a testimonial, whether it's public or private, and let that be the
mm,
what detaches them from what the MAGA movement was. It doesn't need to be anything. It's not getting rebaptized, so to speak, in that
okay.
sense. Maybe for some it's their, to use a bit of an analogy, it's their first time as baptized, because they've now reformed their lives to some
Mm,
extent. So and I'm actually not registered with any party personally. I am registered to vote, but I reserve the right to change my mind on that, but I feel like it gives me some more credibility with Leaving MAGA, given
mm,
that we're a nonprofit. And Doug, I just want to make a comment also, about the ones you're saying the tree of liberalism has borne some rotten fruit. Is that I'm not defending anyone's ignorance, mine or another's,
right.
but
Sure.
I will quote here from the book of Luke, which was, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they are doing." I don't doubt that the beliefs are sincerely held, but I
Yeah.
also think that many in MAGA have had their common fears and anxieties that we all share exploited and manipulated.
Yeah.
And I think that the way that they that the way that manifests itself is by, let's just blow the entire system to smithereens. The problem with that I came to discover, it's really easy to destroy something. It is much more difficult to build something or rebuild something or start anew. So I wanted a disruptor back in 15 and 16.
Mhm.
We got a disruptor. The only problem was it was one anathema and antithetical to democracy and our institutions and rule of law.
Hmm. Yeah, and curiously, and I think we should admit, millions of Americans saw it differently. Like Trump got 62 million people to vote for him in 2016, 72 million in 2020, and 77 million in
Yep.
2024. And some people like to say, well, that's because the total population of eligible voters went up. And that's true in 2024. But the number that it went up by in between 2020 and 2024, I mean, it went up in 2020 because of lots of openness for voting. Um, Trump picked up more of those voters than the population increase of popular voters would indicate. So more people were saying yes to Trump after his term, after the insurrectionist activities, after the convictions, after his behavior post presidency. They still said yes to him and said, we want even more disruption. We want the guy who said they're eating our dogs. We want the guy who said, I will strike a deal with Putin day one. I mean, so there's some just sheer realization we all have to come to that, like, a lot of Americans looked at, and then they looked at Kamala Harris, who I'd worked hard to invite people to vote for, and they said, nope. So there's some realities that people like you and I, who live in a world where we're like, hey, some of us have made a shift. Millions of others have made the shift the other direction. And that, frankly, Rich, that keeps me up at night, which is probably why I reached out to you when when I did. Like, this is really hard. This is really hard.
So many of those, the majority who voted, and it's hard to exactly gauge how many, but the majority who did vote are not very political. They're mostly indifferent politically. They don't really follow news and consume
Yes.
political media the way that we do. And I believe there are two primary reasons why the election went the way that it did. Not to say there aren't other reasons and that there were problems that the Democrats had. It didn't help that Kamala had, 4 months to run a campaign or so, which is a different conversation about whether former President Biden should have dropped out sooner.
Oh, there's no debate in my mind.
Yeah,
He
spoiler
caused the
alert, he should
problem.
have.
Yes, he
Mhm.
caused the problem.
Yeah,
Anyway,
spoiler alert, he
yeah,
definitely should have. But
I'm not
I
trying to
think
blame the
there,
victim here, but I am wanting to be sure that
yeah, and
that
I
credit is
concur
given
with
where
you.
credit is due.
I concur with you wholeheartedly on this point. The first reason is mis and disinformation. And I think someone who is not political is particularly susceptible to being influenced by lies and inculcated into the right
Mm-hmm.
wing by falsehoods. And I think there's another reason, and that's not to say that they're more vulnerable to being influenced because they lack intelligence or good character. It's just if you're not paying attention closely, what tends to get the most noise is what people over time will believe, or if they don't believe it, Doug, they'll tend to think that it's just absurd and outlandish and shouldn't
Yes.
be taken seriously. And then there's a second reason that I actually have written about this. People can find it at my media section at our site, leavingmaga.org. A misunderstanding of what capitalism and free markets are. And I think that misunderstanding led people to think that we needed a change of incumbency, and we needed someone whom they think can fix some of the
Yeah.
economic woes that we're experiencing, and thought that maybe there would usher in some kind of
Yeah.
economic utopia by electing a financial savior and messiah. And now a lot of those voters, I think they are discovering, or at least they're starting to pay a little bit more attention to the fact that their hopes are being dashed,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
there isn't an economic nirvana that's coming, and that maybe they're starting to think, well, I thought it would be different, and now it's turned out not to be. And we could do an entire episode about the misunderstanding of what our system of commerce is, but free capitalism and free markets result in prices fluctuating and result in sometimes we don't do as well this
Yeah.
year as we did last year. I think the question, are you better off today than 4 years ago, which every politician asks that every election season, is a very illogical question for a capitalist society.
Yes. Good Lord. Yeah.
By the time this episode is over, some people will be doing better than they were at the beginning. Some will be doing worse at the beginning
Yeah.
than they were at the beginning. And that's what capitalism is. And I'm a capitalist. I do think it's the best
Yeah.
system for innovation and entrepreneurship. But a lot of the ignorance, not stupidity, but ignorance about capitalism drove a lot of people to the MAGA side, thinking that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were the source of all their
Yes.
economic worries.
Dude, I am with you. And yes, let's have that conversation about how economics works, how it does. We do that. We have a whole section on our playlist on YouTube, which is just our economics conversation, trying as best we can. Alex from Florida is on the YouTube chat. I can see her now. She's begging for us to have that conversation more often
Okay.
and more time.
Yeah, let's
So
do it.
yes, it is essential. And if COVID was the reason Trump lost the 2020 election. Now, I thought Trump's other behavior before COVID would be enough, and there's no way people who didn't vote for him in 2016 were going to vote for him in 2020. I was totally wrong. But as it turns out, it was COVID that caused people to be like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. We need different. And then the impact of COVID was we pumped $1 trillion into the economy to save the economy, partly because of Trump's mismanagement of COVID, but we would have probably done a great portion of that anyway. Then that caused inflation, and that's what got Biden. So the two men shared the same crisis that inflicted the presidencies. And we don't have a way to talk about that. And, with 200 million people in the country that care about any of this stuff and 150 million or so that are going to choose to vote on election day. And it's not what anyone chose to make it about. And I just want to rant for a minute to my Democratic counterparts. If you continue to complain about disinformation on the right and don't spend your time communicating what you believe, then you are part of the problem. The problem is not what the right is saying to America. The problem is what you are not saying to America. Look, I spend a lot of time paying attention to politics. I heard Joe Biden's voice and Kamala Harris's voice a dozen times in 4 years. I heard Donald Trump nearly every day. While he was in political exile, would still hear from him. He communicated consistently and constantly. And the people running the White House, running the economy, would talk to reporters and not talk to the American people. I got, and glad to get them, and I clicked on the button, recruitment to contribute text messages from the campaigns for a year. Every single day. Did I get a single text message with a link that said, here is me talking to the American people about anything important? Never. Did I get a bunch of like, here's me walking on a stage? But did I get a, hey, I'm talking to you, the American people, about what's going on? Like, if we're going to claim disinformation and not produce information, okay, rant is about to end. That is on us. And the American people were no smarter about anything the government does on Election Day, November 5th, 2024, than they were on Inauguration Day, 2021. And that is on the communication system of the Democratic Party and the rest of it. We didn't help anybody. We just simply said, why are you listening to these people? And look at all the disinformation that's going out. Okay, I'm not done with the rant, apparently. Even in all the places, the Midas touch and the stuff people do, never was it like, hey, let's give you a worldview here that you can carry with you. And what MAGA does well is gives a worldview. If you're unfamiliar with the concept of a worldview, this might not make a lot of sense, but they create a construct in which the world makes sense. Democrats say stuff like, it's complicated, and then don't explain it and don't have anybody out explaining. Or if they do, they explain it to reporters and think that people are then going to read the report. And you know what? The journalists are not the media arm of the Democratic Party or the presidency. Talk to the American people at the biggest bully pulpit in the world. And if you can't do it because your age or because your communication style, whatever, get somebody who can, okay, I could go on, and maybe, after we're done with all of this, you and I can, lick wounds about this. But it drives me crazy to hear people blaming the right for doing what they think they should do, while people on the left don't communicate anything about what America should do. And if you want to critique me for overstatement, show me anything. I would be glad to see it. And don't send me a Robert Reich video here and there. It's inexcusable from our political leaders top down and all the rest of it. So I don't know. There's so many problems in all of this that it doesn't feel like there's a political community or a political imagination that we're inviting people into. I mean, since Obama in 2004, I have felt like, man, we are scrambling. Obama 2008. We are scrambling to try to find some kind of a picture of what we're up to. I don't know. And MAGA, and I say the same thing about Christian nationalists because I'm an anti-Christian nationalist worker and all this stuff. I'm like, the Christian nationalists are winning the argument because at least they're creating a vision that's compelling to people. And other Christians are not. So we have to be in the business of compelling people to a more preferable future. And if we don't, we can't be complaining that they are. Okay, now my rant is done. Please. Sorry about that.
I think that any anti-message is only going to take you so far. And that's exactly what happened with the Democrats in this election. And if we operate off the premise that most people are not political, are not paying attention to at least traditional news sources, where are they likely going to go? So now we're back to destination again. Are they going to go to the one they're hearing from often, or are they going to go to the one they're not hearing from often, if ever?
Yes.
And and so it doesn't require a political PhD, and no offense to anyone out there with a political science PhD, to understand why 90% of America's counties shifted rightward in this election. There isn't some enigma to all of this. It's because they were the ones who were hearing for years messaging. And if it was an absurd message about Springfield, Ohio, it was just essentially written off as just self-promotion or just trying to be funny or just trolling.
Yeah.
When in reality, there was a danger to all of this,
Yeah.
but the challenge is that danger wasn't articulated, and unseriousness oftentimes masks danger. So now I'm starting to pay attention to what Democrats are going to do at town halls, because there was just this recent report
Mm-hmm.
that the House, the arm of the GOP that governs the House of Representatives, and the Republicans there, I should say, the Republican House members, that leadership is telling the House Republicans don't do town halls
Right.
anymore.
Right.
So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, if I'm the Democratic Party, this is a gift. This is a gift to me
Yes.
that I wasn't expecting, because now I've got all of these districts that I could go to in thousands of counties, to go into them and start to and then get in front of them, because that's where mis and disinformation can be combated on a face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball, belly button to belly button interaction.
Yes.
The idea that we're gonna challenge mis and disinformation online, again, that resistance has failed.
I couldn't agree more. Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should put together some joint effort town halls. We love that stuff, man. We love getting into buses and driving around and meeting with people and talking to them, because I
And I
hear
got a
people.
workshop, Doug. I have a workshop. Apologies for interrupting. I have a
No,
workshop that's we call it "Where Did You Hear That?" It's going to be a video
nice.
series. It's going to be a workshop, and again, it's not
Oh,
designed to shame anyone, but it's to get them thinking about the origin sources of their information. Because my hypothesis is that mis and disinformation is consumed very much locally, from places of worship, from
yes.
VFWs. The source of the lie might come from, let's say, a Tucker Carlson, but the person who's hearing it from their pastor, the origin source is the pastor, not Tucker Carlson. So we're going to
100%.
develop something to home in on this, and get people thinking about, is all the information they have complete, is it accurate, etc.
Yeah. Look, ideas move person to person. They, I hear people complaining about Fox News and I'm like, look, on a good night, Fox News is going to have 4 million people, or over a month. 4 million. It's nothing, and it's the same 4 million people. Like it's teeny. It's not 77 million. You get to 77 million by people talking to each other.
That's right.
We had this little campaign that we revved up last week. That was, look, if 72 million people who didn't vote for Donald Trump would have a conversation every day with a Trump supporter, you could have 72 million conversations a day. That's a lot. You run that over 1,400 days and you can get something done. But we know that doesn't happen. We know that people, and partly because people don't know what they would say. People say it all the time. They're like, what would I even say to my Trump supporting friends? And I'm like, okay, I think now that's on us as an organization. If we're going to say, if you see something, say something, they say, I don't know what I would say. Okay, we may have a little bit of work to do to help people know what to say. And maybe that's what your organization has already done. We're working on a curriculum called Courageous Conversations, how to talk about faith and politics with those you love most. Because look, this is not going to be won by some kind of figure out how to talk to a stranger about difference.
Right.
This is, how do you talk to a loved one about difference? That's where the problem is solved, is personal conversations, mixed marriages, split families, work situations, best friends that now can't talk about things. And so I honestly think what could help is if we said, hey, here's a container by which you could have this conversation. Here's different ideas. People don't just want simple answers, but what people don't want is to be looked down on and for someone to make it complicated and think they're stupid. And politicians, no, that's not the right word. Politics makes people feel stupid, and people don't like feeling stupid. And they want some straight talking, and they want some things that kind of make sense, and they just want to be able to talk about it for a little bit. We've already been going on, I don't know, should I look here? Yeah, we've been going on for 59 minutes and 45 seconds. Anybody who's still watching this has a tolerance level that is outside of 99% of the American people, right?
Are there any questions? Are there any questions that came in?
Yeah. Okay. Been a whole bunch. So, hey, yeah, if you've got a comment or a question here for Rich or for me or for anybody, I'm scanning through the conversation here in the chat. By the way, pardon me for the echo. I caused an echo at the beginning. In the first 30, 40 seconds, there was an echo on your end, Rich, and that was created by me, not by you. Um, okay, Sam. I mean, there's some comments and there's some questions. The antagonism that happens between people is really hard. So I'm going to give you a feel for some of this. This person says, for years I was brainwashed in the church to demonize feminists, to demonize lesbians and homosexuality, and to vote Republican. I will never go back. So there's some cross currents of the religious community with the political community that's in this thing. Jim says, I have lots of MAGA friends. We agree to disagree. Talking to each other is very unpretentious. Once communication stops, bad things start. Yeah, and it's that's a real thing that I think is worth talking about. Like when there's fundamental disagreements about the reality of things, that's not the place to have the conversation, I would suggest. Like and I wonder what your experience is with that personally or as an organization. What do you do in that space where you're like, okay, hold on a minute. We can't even talk about this.
Yeah, I think that for everyone, use your best judgment, because if you feel like there is a particular topic of conversation that is going to create, if it's a tendentious type discussion, conversation topic, not every conversation about every issue has to be had. And if there's one that someone just knows is going to result in the conversation or the relationship going sideways, trust your judgment, just avoid it.
Yeah.
Not every discussion needs to be had.
Yeah. So in our world, we like to think that there's problems, and then there's the personal struggle with that problem, and then there's a solution suggestion to the problem. To talk about the solution and argue about the solution before you've talked about the struggle that people have with the problem is not the most effective way. You can spend a lot of time talking about the struggle. That's empathy. You can have empathetic connection about the shared struggle. And then say, now we're going to differ on what we think the solution is. We may even differ on where we think the problem came from. What we share is the struggle, because the struggle is real, man. But that's the thing, right? That the struggle is the place. And I got to tell you, to my progressive friends, you tend to think that the MAGA people didn't get into this because they're struggling. You think they got into this because they're powerful. MAGA became the option that seemed like the best option to deal with the struggle.
And who else were they hearing from? Right? If we come back to that point,
Totally.
who
Totally.
are they hearing from? What organizations were they hearing from? And if someone and it will take two to tango here, right? So if there's two who want to engage in what is going to be, let's say, a controversial topic, or one where the two people know they're on as diametrically opposite sides as possible, if they're two willing to engage in that discussion, then it does help practice the empathy needed to try to
Mm-hmm.
understand how somebody comes to the outcome they do, because nobody, even whether it's myself, you, Doug, anybody watching, nobody comes to a conclusion all on their own.
That's it.
We are shaped, we have influences, whether they're groups or our news sources or our upbringing, our experiences. This amalgam of who we are, that all of that informs our decisions and
Mm-hmm.
creates who we are as
Mm-hmm.
an individual.
Mm-hmm. Rich, this has been so great. If there's a whole bunch of other comments in here, but we've taken the time.
Well, any
All of us.
people can. I want to encourage everyone to reach out to us at our site. I've got my own. I've got my email that's actually on the contact page, so everyone can reach out to me directly. And yes, I do actually read the emails, and they actually do come to me. So
Yeah.
everyone can find us at leavingmaga.org. We've got our contact there. We've got our media. My email's there. I want to hear from everyone, whatever your comments, questions are.
Well, thank you. And look, I think our organizations can be and should be synergistically engaged and finding some ways. I think that, in our world, we like to describe the difference between a problem and a predicament. That problems have solutions, and you just put one of the solutions in place. You got a broken sink, faucet, just replace the faucet, or put in a new bushing or whatever. It's just a problem, you fix it. But then there's a predicament. And a predicament might be, oh, the water tower has a problem. Okay. That requires multiple responses. Predicaments don't have solutions. They have many responses. So much of what we've described here is not a problem, it's a predicament. And we need many, many ways to respond to the political separation and all that. And if we think that that MAGA is the problem as opposed to one of the responses to a problem or to a predicament, we're bringing the wrong toolkit to the crisis. And frankly, that I don't know, liberalism is one of the responses to a predicament, right? That's where we are. This is not problem solution stuff. This isn't us, those things exist, and we should have those arguments, and they work with each other. Trump is now using a whole bunch of solutions to things that aren't problems, tariffs and nonsense. It's just like he's causing the problem, he's not fixing it, in my view. So I'm not saying there aren't times where that happens, but the bigger question here is we're not just dealing with a little thing. We're dealing with a predicament, and it's going to take lots of people and lots of responses. And you might look to organizations like leavingmaga.org or Vote Common Good, and you should. But I'll tell you what we're also doing. We're looking to you. Like, not trying to pass the buck here, but we're trying to figure out, like, I don't know, you're actually an expert on how to talk to people in your world about MAGA. You know why? Because your brother-in-law, your sister, your mom, your son,
Right.
they're unique. They're not all the same. Not every MAGA person got there for the same reason and stays there for the same reason. There's many a reason why people are in this world.
Exactly. And we can respect each and everyone's individuality. And I know that Shakespeare penned that all the world's a stage, and there's always performance and politics are inseparable. They always have been. But maybe an appropriate close here. I'm thinking Second Corinthians. When I was a child, I played with childish things, and I grew older and I put away those childish things.
Yeah.
And that's not. I don't say that solely about MAGA. We are lacking a seriousness in the country, and I think that we've increasingly become an unserious nation, and that needs to be reversed, and quickly.
Yeah. And you can be serious with joy and with a wink and with
Yes, and doesn't have to be in a
stern.
and we right, and it doesn't have to be serious in a policy paper either.
Yeah, our kids would say it when they were teenagers and stuff, and we'd take them into the living room to have a conversation. They're like, "Oh boy, we're having the living room talk. Someone's in trouble." Totally different talk than we had in the kitchen, in the family room, in the yard. We need to have these conversations in the kitchen, the family room, in the yard, not out in the living room. If that metaphor could make any sense. Well, Rich, I want to commend you on bringing that college study degree of both English in quoting Shakespeare and theology in quoting the Bible right to the conclusion here. So well done, wherever that degree was earned from.
Thank you.
It's been well utilized.
Christian Brothers University, unsurprisingly.
Oh, where is that?
Yeah. Iona University, and it's in New Rochelle, New York, so suburb in New York City.
Yeah. I heard a bit of what I thought might be a New York way of saying words.
You never lose that accent.
No,
the
never
Northeast
should.
accent never goes away.
And are you comfortable telling people what part of Florida you're in?
Yeah, sure. I'm in Broward County. I've been in Florida since 2012, but currently I'm in Broward at the moment.
Now, a lot of people only know Broward County from Hanging Chad legend of, I don't know, 2000. What part of Florida is that?
So there are the three metro South Florida counties are Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. So I'm in the middle one.
Yeah, there you go. So, to those of you who, say bad things about certain states or good things about certain states based on who their electoral recipients have been or the governor is, there aren't blue states and red states. I'm going to get all Obama in '04. Uh, th- there's just places where some political parties win more than others, and that shifts around. Florida used to be seriously blue. Arkansas was very blue. Now they're red. Colorado used to be red. Now it's blue because red and blue doesn't make any sense, and purple and that kind of thing is just not helpful either. There are people making choices politically based on information and experiences. And if you don't think there's something to this, just ask yourself, why do politics outcomes cluster in certain locations? Like, why does gerrymandering work? It's because you live with near people and you tend to start thinking similarly politically. Why does that happen? How does that happen? And that's something just worth thinking, just a little more, I don't know, a little more Friday night dreamy thought about why is the world the way it is? Why are there whole states that shift? Because information is, borderless. The people in Arkansas aren't getting certain information from 1992 to 2025. They get the same information everybody else did, but something else was afoot. And often it is that people were active and working. You find out these crime scenes have fingerprints all over them. There were people there. People make change in America. That is how it works. Unless you believe that there's just information
Yeah.
overlords that are just downloading. And if you do, fair enough. But that's not how it works. There's, it's people influencing other people, and so we should be in the people business first and foremost. If we're not in the people business, it's just not going to work. It's not about systems and structures alone.
No.
It's about human beings doing humaning things with each other. And actually, okay, I'm going on and on, so sorry. But there's statistics that even show like certain things come into place, more public parks, more ethnic restaurant. Like there's just things that happen that cause people politically to shift one way versus the other. So and they're all rooted in decisions that are made by people. And those decisions are often connected to leaders who make decisions. And Democrats have had a leadership problem across the country from top to bottom for a long time, and a visioning problem. And hopefully that will be different, and hopefully this current crisis that we're in.
Well, I think, Doug, I and the others we featured as testimonials, living proof that a thought system and belief system is not permanent or doesn't have to
Yeah.
be permanent.
We will stop right there. There's no better words for this than that.
I
All right, buddy. Thank
appreciate it
you.
so much. Yeah, I
Thanks.
really appreciate having me on. Thank you so much. Anytime, I'd be happy to come back on.
Okay, y'all. Hey, thanks for being a part of the podcast and all, and share this, and we'll chop this up into little bits and pieces so you can share it more quickly for the 15-second, 20-second